Welcome to this week's Message Connect. I want to thank you for being with us today. Our prayer and desire is that God would take the content of these Message Connects and use them to encourage you in your relationship with Jesus as you discover God's purpose for your life. We're currently in a study called Next Steps. This study is meant to help us answer this question: why does Ringgold do what we do the way we do it? Matthew chapter 28 is a foundational passage for us as a church. Jesus gathers up his remaining disciples after his resurrection, and he says this to them in Matthew 28, beginning in verse 18. Jesus came and told his disciples, I've been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Jesus gathers up his 11 remaining disciples who just failed him, by the way. They messed up royally. If you study any of these, Jesus's 3-year ministry here on earth, his disciples are following around with Jesus and they never really get with the program. They understand, but they don't. They just seem to be always several steps behind Jesus in what he's trying to guide them into. The night before Jesus is arrested and crucified, all he needs is some of his friends just to stay awake with him while he prays and to pray with him. They can't even do that. And then the Roman soldiers arrest Jesus. They all flee. They deny that they ever knew him. So now Jesus circles them all back together, and he comes to these guys who have just failed him in what he's asked them to do. He actually gives them more responsibility and not less. He says, I've actually got more that I'm going to entrust you with. So Jesus says to these 11 remaining guys, disciples, who are filled with all these faults and failures, he gives them a task that Jesus himself never did while he was here on earth. Jesus asked these guys to go global. He says, I want you to take this mission and this message, this gospel message, and I want you to take it to all around the world. They hadn't even been faithful with the gospel, the good news, the message, where they were. Jesus had never done this before. Did you know that Jesus never traveled to a foreign country while he was here on earth? Jesus never preached through an interpreter. He never went on a short-term mission trip with his church, unless you count going from heaven to earth. I guess that qualifies as a pretty significant mission trip, stepping out of heaven and coming to earth. So Jesus asked these guys to go and to take this message global. He says, by the way, I will be with you when you do it. He tells them to do 4 things. 1, go and make disciples. 2, baptizing them. And 3, teaching them how to grow. And number 4, know that I'm with you. These are the 4 things, he says. Now, these seem a little out of order if you think about what Jesus said to them. If I'm in Jesus' situation talking to these disciples, I think I would have kind of worded it this way. I would have said, guys, number 1, know that I'm with you always. 2, go and baptize them. 3, teach them how to grow in me. And 4, so that disciples will be made. This seems to be the logical progression of things that Jesus maybe should have asked them to do. But Jesus begins with make disciples first. And then he says, baptize them. I think the reason why Jesus orders it this way, the way he does, is because he's given us a clue to, 1, who disciples are, what disciples do, and who disciples do it for. If you are brand new to the church and you hear the word disciple, even if you're not brand new to the church and you've been in the church a long time, when you hear the word disciple, you may wonder, what does that mean? I grew up in church, and for the longest time, my impression of a disciple was a super Christian. Anybody with me on that? A disciple was somebody that I may be aspiring to become like, but I'll never be just like them because, that's like the graduate level, the highest level of being a Christian. They're the ones who read their Bible 5 hours a day. They pray 3-4 hours a day. They can speak the Bible in the original languages. They're like the Avengers of the Christian faith. That's how I kind of pictured the word disciple in the church when I was growing up. But this is not what a disciple is. A disciple is what Jesus has called all of us to. You can be a disciple the day you start following Jesus. Now, to simply define disciple is simply somebody who chooses to trust Jesus more than their own logic, feelings, and emotions, and begins to follow after him by spending daily time with him in his word, the Bible. Jesus says, would you just discern the next step that you need to take? Would you just walk with me for a while? Would you just apply what I'm saying to you from my word? I know you're hearing it, but Jesus is saying, are you listening to it? Are you applying these words to your life? If you get to this place in your life where you're like, I just need to go to new levels of spiritual depth, maybe you just need to start loving people better the way Jesus loved them, to have the same attitude of Jesus in all things, to be more like Jesus. The analogy that I use is everybody needs a bib and everybody needs an apron. Now, if you're not wearing one of these, your spiritual metabolism is going to be off. You see, if we need a bib and an apron, basically what we're saying is we need to be feeding and growing. Now, I can't do as a preacher all the feeding and all the growing from the stage at church. Our church cannot possibly give you all the things that you need to grow. You're going to have to learn how to self-feed at some point. You're going to have to learn to grow by wearing a bib. You're going to have to put on an apron and begin to serve others if you're going to be more like Jesus. If all you're doing is feeding, you're just going to get spiritually fat. If all you're doing is serving, then you're not going to have the nutrients that you need to go and to continue to serve, and you're going to wear out or give up. So let me tell you what the next step is all about. Next steps is all about Matthew chapter 28. Matthew chapter 28 is the mission of our church. What we want to do in our church is we want to remove unnecessary barriers that keep people from Jesus. This is simply what Next Steps is all about. For the next few weeks, what I want to do as we study together is help us to answer two vital questions. And you might also be kind of asking these questions now in your own mind. Why does Ringo do what we do the way we do it? I want to be really clear. I want to be very clear that every Bible teaching, Jesus-centered church in our communities has the same mission. And that mission is Matthew chapter 28. Now, we might phrase it differently, but this is the mission of our churches. Now, the difference between churches is the way we seek to accomplish this mission of Matthew 28. This is called methodology. That would be the programs we use, the philosophies of ministry that we have. Ringo Church has been a church of men and women who have understood what the mission and the methods of the church are and didn't confuse the two. And we continue to grow in this. This is so important for us to understand in the day and age in which we live. We've got to understand our mission. And then we need to understand the methods that we use to help accomplish our mission. We have to realize that the mission stays the same, but the methods always change. And they need to change. We see God say something very similar to this in Isaiah chapter 43, verse 19. God says, for I'm about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? In other words, what God is saying there, God didn't wait for us. He just started. Do you not see it, he says? Are you going to wake up and catch up to what I'm doing in this world and through this world? That's what God is saying. Or are we going to stay hijacked by our own personal nostalgia, by the traditions of the past, which, by the way, traditions of the past are not bad things. But God says, listen, I need to ask you to continue to press in, to reach people who are far from me. That means the methods may have to change. 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32. It says, from the tribe of Issachar, there were 200 leaders of the tribe with their relatives. All these men understood the signs of the times and knew the best course for Israel to take. Now, what does that mean? Is they were prepared to walk with God in the times in which they knew was the best course for Israel to take. They wanted to be cutting edge, not for the sake of being cutting edge, because God had called them there. God had pulled them out of their comfort zones to take Israel to the place that God wanted Israel to go to. And we want to do the same thing in the church today. God has called us in our day, in our age, in our culture to discern where we go next. And how do we continue to reach people, the people that God cares about? And what this means is that if you've been a part of the church for the last 30 years, I've been here a long time. There's a whole lot of change that has happened here in the life of the church at Ringgold. This is not the same church that hired me 30 years ago. We're not even the same church that we were a year ago. Our mission has not changed. What we believe about God and Jesus and salvation will never change, but the methods that we use always change. Now, here's what I want you to grab a hold of. We are married to our mission, but not married to the methods. If you don't understand this church, any church, is going to frustrate the snot out of you. I've done this personally in my walk with Jesus in the church. I've been guilty of this. I confuse all the time, if I'm not careful, mission and methods. Why? Maybe because there was a method that I was used to that I really enjoyed. I loved it. Maybe there was a song that I sang that I was really, compelled to hear and to listen to and compelled me. Maybe there was a class that I took that drew me closer to Jesus. And then I began to ask, well, why don't we do that anymore? It was so meaningful in my life. I missed that. It was a method. The mission stays the same, but God is a God who does new things and changes the methods so that you and I can continue to reach people in this next generation who are far from Him, far from God. Now, here's the next question that you may be asking. How do you get connected and grow spiritually in a church? You might be thinking, all right, Don, so what about me? What about my connection? What about my personal spiritual growth? And this is a fair question. I do not want to just amass a big crowd of people in church on the weekends who are just spectators of a worship service. We want you to become participants in what God wants to do in your life and around the world. We don't want you to come and become a consumer of religious goods and services at church. We want you to be a contributor to what God is doing around the world. Next Steps is a carefully thought out process to try to help each and every one of us, regardless of where you are, on your spiritual journey, to know what your next step is and what next step you need to take personally in your spiritual walk. You see, this is a walk. And what is your next step of spiritual growth and connection in our church and throughout our community? The Bible doesn't talk very much about membership. When the Bible talks about membership in the church, it talks about being engaged in a church movement, that you become part of the body of Christ. It's first Jesus in you, and He's got some stuff to do in you and through you, and He wants you to do that through a church family. So membership for us is all about this word, engagement. I just want you to learn that you can lean into Jesus. And the more that you lean into Jesus, the more He will touch your life and change your life. Now, how do you do this? First, you start following Jesus. 2, you discover God's purpose for your life. 3, you go and make a difference in the world for Jesus. We don't want to just amass a crowd of people on the weekends. We want to help you to know how to connect and grow spiritually. Now, here's where we're going to go over the next few weeks as we study together. 1, I want to encourage you to start following Jesus and to be baptized into Christ if you've not done that. 2, I want to encourage you to connect with others and join a connect group. 3, I want to encourage you to grow in your faith in a group through daily spiritual disciplines. 4, go and discover your purpose. Join a ministry team and make a difference. Now listen, your life might really be messy right here, right now. You might be in the middle of a painful divorce. There might be some things going on in your life and your family. You're saying, this is just not the right time for me to come to Jesus because everything is a mess. This is a perfect time. This is the perfect time to come to Jesus. You don't have to have all this figured out to come to Jesus. Being a follower of Jesus is all about a relationship and not a religion. Do you know the difference between the two? Our religion says, figure it all out. Figure out what you believe, get all your questions answered, and then convert. A relationship says you're going to have to come to these places in your life where you have questions. And you're going to have questions the rest of your life. And you're going to have issues that you're going to be working through the rest of your life. Life is really hard. But for the rest of your life, you don't need to trust in your logic, in your feelings, and your emotions. Put your trust in the one who understands it all and begin to follow after Jesus. We got so many great churches in our communities. The challenge of having so many great churches around us is that sometimes, we're almost like cattle. We kind of graze around from one church to the next. I really like the teaching over here. I really like the worship over there. I really like what they have to offer in ministry over here. I want you to lock in and be fully there in the church that God has called you to, because no church is perfect. I want you to lock in and be on mission somewhere. Get plugged into a church. I want to encourage you to start following Jesus today. We have provided for you Message Connect questions. They've been provided for you in a discussion guide. The Message Connect is focused on next steps. Next steps are designed to help you to dive deeper. We want to encourage you and challenge you to take these next steps. At Ringgold, we believe growing people change. To grow, we need to start talking. We need to start thinking, start sharing, and start praying. Most of all, we need to start doing. So I want to encourage you today, get started. Get started where you need to be in taking these next steps. God bless.